Hi everyone, this is Dr. Morgan Gross, Associate Director of the Academic Resource Center, and today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about writing abstracts. So you may be more or less familiar already with abstracts. We're going to talk about the genre of abstract writing, and we're going to look at some examples of abstracts together. And these examples will be from different fields, so you can get a view of how they might differ from one field to another. We're also going to look at the purpose of an abstract. So why do you write them? What are they for? What are they supposed to be doing? And elements of effective abstracts. So what should a good abstract have in it for sure? And finally, I want to encourage you to take some time at the end of this workshop to just work on the abstracts that you're writing and try to apply what we've talked about in this workshop to your abstracts and make sure that it's meaningful and it sticks with you. Here we go. So take a moment to reflect on the following questions. You might want to pause this recording and just think about it before we move on. What do you already know about the genre of abstracts? Have you written them before? Have you seen them and read them? Have you ever really thought much about them? What do you know? And where have you previously encountered abstracts? Do you remember seeing them somewhere? Where would you find those? If you want a few more seconds to think about these questions, then you might pause your video now. Otherwise, let's keep going. These are some things that you might have come up with as you were reflecting on what you already know about abstracts and where you've seen them before. Very broadly, the purpose of an abstract is to advertise the project that the abstract is for and help the reader decide if it's going to be worth their time to read that project in its entirety. So think about, for example, when you're conducting research for your classes, you're in a library database and you find a title in your search that looks compelling. So then you go on and you read the abstract for that article before you take the time to download it and read the full article, because the abstract should tell you pretty quickly right away if you do want to keep going and investing in that article, or if you need to move on and find something that fits your research better. So we already mentioned one place that you've probably seen abstracts before in those research databases, but here are some other places you might have seen them. Maybe before a journal article that you've been assigned to read, so right before you get into the body of that article. You might have seen them in a conference program for an academic conference that you've gone to or are considering going to. They usually have a program, and so you can decide which presentations you want to go to. They'll give an abstract of that presentation in the program, and then you can pick and choose where you want to spend your time. Maybe also on the back of a book. The back of the book text might be a little bit different from an abstract, but it does have a lot in common with abstracts. And then you might have also seen something like an abstract next to a work of art in a museum, something that tells a little bit about it, the title, the medium, maybe what the purpose or the meaning behind that work of art is, something that gives a little bit more description and information about it. Okay, now that we've done a quick intro to abstracts, I've got an activity for us. So in this activity, we're going to look at 3 sample abstracts. They come from different fields. The first one's from hard sciences, and then the second one we'll look at is from social sciences, and then the final one we'll look at is from a creative field. So as we look at these 3 different abstracts, I want you to take a moment to reflect on each of them. What do you notice when you read them? Anything that stands out to you here could be the moves that the writer is making, what information they're choosing to include, the order in which that information shows up, and even down to the language that they're using in the abstract. Anything like that. What are you noticing? Also, let's do a little evaluation. What do you think is working well in each abstract versus not so well? None of them are perfect, but I did pick them to be kind of representative. So, what do you think is good and bad about each abstract as you read it? Here we go. The first sample abstract I pulled out of a research database online. So this is what you would see if you were searching for information about the topic of this article, and then you would look at the abstract before you read the full article. So I'm not going to read it all out to you. This would just be a good time to pause the recording and take a moment to read through this and think about those questions that I asked you in the previous slide that will help you reflect on what you're seeing here in this abstract. And when you're ready, we'll move on and discuss some of the things that you might have noticed. So these are some of the pros and cons that I identified in this abstract. You may have identified some things that were good and bad about that abstract that are different from what I've put up here. That's good. It's a good starting point to think and reflect on what you notice in abstracts and what you think is working in them or not working in them. So here's what I found. Some of the good things about this abstract are that it did a really good job of providing background information that was necessary to understand the purpose of the study and the significance of the article. It really set that up well early on in the abstract. Another thing I thought this abstract did well was give a strong emphasis on the problem and motivation for the research. So explaining why they wanted to study this thing and what it was building upon in terms of other research before it. Some things that I thought that this abstract could have done a little bit better was maybe not use as much discipline-specific jargon. And that maybe applies more to the situation that you all are in, more so than the situation for which this abstract was written, because it was published in a scholarly journal for a very specific audience of scientists, but you're going to be writing abstracts that have a broader audience, so you might want to go light on any jargon that you use in your abstracts, kind of tone that down and write for a more broad audience. This abstract also, I thought, could have been a little bit more detailed and direct when it came to the results statement of the study and discussion of the implications. So what did they find and what does that mean for the people who are going to be reading that article in its full length? All right, let's move on and take a look at an abstract from a social sciences field. This abstract is one of those abstracts that precedes the full article, and it was taken directly from a journal. So this shows up right before you get into the body of the text for the article. I'll be quiet for a moment, but you might also want to go ahead and pause the video now and take a minute to read through this short abstract and see what you notice about this one, maybe in comparison to the other one. What's it doing well or not so well? Yeah, what do you think about it? So take a moment, and then when you're ready, you can resume the video and we'll go on to the next slide. So these are the pros and cons that I noted for the second abstract that we looked at. First, I thought it had a very clear statement of the problem and research methods. So we knew right away, okay, this is what the research is responding to, and this is how they conducted the research. Definitely in comparison to the first abstract we look at, this one used language that was very easy to understand. It wasn't so jargon heavy. It was a little bit more simple and clear and straightforward. Some things that this abstract I thought maybe could have done a little bit better though. First, it could have been more forthcoming with the information about results and the significance of the study. So what actually were the findings and what do they mean to us? It did a little bit of what I call like hinting around, more like a movie trailer, like not really giving that end away so much as hinting at what could be to come. So for an abstract, it is important that you just give it all away up front. You're not trying to hold anything back. We want to know right away, here's all the info about this article stated as simply and concisely as possible. And this abstract didn't quite get to the end information. And along those same lines, this abstract probably could have included a little bit more summary of important information from the article rather than just an outline of the topics covered. So even though you want your abstract to be simple and concise, this one might have gone a little bit overboard on that. So you have to find the right balance for giving enough information, but not too much. Let's move on to the third example of an abstract. This example is for a creative project, and it is actually coming from a student symposium. So it was, the abstract here describes an entire collection of art, even though it was placed next to an individual piece of art in that collection. So I'll give you a moment to read, but you should probably pause so you can take as much time as you need to not just read it, but reflect on those questions about what you notice and what you think is effective in this abstract or not so effective, like we've been doing with the other two abstracts. And when you're ready, we will go on and talk about what I noticed as pros and cons in this abstract. One thing that I thought this creative abstract did well was situate the work, the project that it was discussing among the work of other artists. So it put it into context, movements, and a little bit of comparison there, and also state the contribution that it was making. So what was the motivation behind this work and what gap did it seek to fill in the existing body of works? A couple of things I thought this abstract might have done a little bit better. I did think the ideas in it were pretty clear, but they maybe could have been stated a little bit more concisely. There were definitely moments where I was reading through it and started to feel like it was getting a little bit rambly. So if you can say what you want to say about your project as straightforward and simple and concise as possible, that just shows that you know it really well. You know it frontwards and backwards and can speak to it really clearly and intelligibly. So I always aim for shorter and then add to that as I think I can when I'm building the abstract up. Start short and then build on it. Also, depending on your field, it might not be appropriate for you to use first person point of view, like the words I in your abstract. For humanities and more creative fields, it's typically fine to use that first person point of view. But if you're working in the hard sciences, for example, you would definitely want to avoid that. So just think about what field you're working in and what the language conventions of that field are, and try to be consistent with that in the abstracts that you're writing. Okay, now we've looked at 3 different examples of abstracts from different fields. So take a minute to think about, from discussing these examples, examining them, and evaluating them, what can you identify as some of the qualities of effectively composed abstracts? What did they have in common? What are you starting to see abstracts should include or should do? Anything like that that you can think of. Take a moment to think about that before we move on and I give away some answers again. So pause the video if you need to, and then in just a couple of seconds, I'll keep going. So this is probably the most important slide in this entire workshop. And I just kind of stuck it in the middle here. That was mean of me, right? But these are the things that you definitely want to have included in your abstract, pretty much regardless of what discipline you're working in. It might look different from one discipline to another, but the basic points here are going to be about the same. Okay, so some of these elements we've already touched on in this webinar, so I'll go through some of them more briefly than others. The first thing that you want to include, and these are in the order that you probably should include them in your abstract too, by the way. The first thing that you want to include is the motivation or problem that inspired you to do the project that you did. So was there some issue that you were trying to answer or resolve? Was there a gap in the knowledge of the field that you identified that you wanted to try to fill? Something there that made you want to invest in the project that you took on. What drove you to it? The next thing that you want to include is context and contribution. So this is where you bring in a little bit of that literature review kind of work. So what are other people in your field saying about this topic that you researched already? Give some of that background, and some, when I say contribution, I mean, where is your project fitting into that context? How is it part of the larger puzzle? What piece is your project serving in that bigger picture? The next thing that you want to include is some information about your approach. So this might mean your research methods if you're working in a field where you actually conducted a research study. How did you go about doing the research? Was it qualitative, quantitative? What methods did you use? Observation, interview, etc., etc. Anything like that, the information that you can provide about that, and not just what you did, but why you did it. This might look a little bit different in, for example, a creative field. Here you might talk about what materials you chose to use for your project, and any other decisions you had to make about how to create the work that you created. Did you go somewhere to be inspired or to find out more about the topic? Or did you work in isolation or in collaboration? Basically anything like that that you can tell us about how you got that project done. And the next thing, and this part is really important for your abstracts, are your results. So what actually was the outcome of the project? What did you find? What did you learn? What's that takeaway that you want to share with your readers? And I just reminded you here, don't tease. It's not a movie trailer. You're not just trying to hook us and get us to want to read more. I mean, that's part of it. But you also want to just tell us directly, here's what you found, here was the result or outcome, what was created, anything like that, as a result of doing this project. The way that this last piece here differs, conclusion and significance, from the results, now's your time to answer that question, so what? okay, you found this information as a result of doing the study or the project. So what do you have to say about it taking like a step back, kind of a bigger picture, bigger perspective of the project, maybe from thinking about what you want your audience to get out of it? What actually is it contributing, or what makes it significant? You found this out, or you completed this project. So what? What do you have to say about it? What do you want us to take away? Basically, what do you want us to end up with? And that's what you would put there. So when I write my abstracts, I usually try to write about one sentence for each of these. Depending on what your word count limit is, you might have a little more wiggle room and you might decide to vote a couple of sentences to some of these different elements if you think that they need a little bit more space because they are very important or you have a lot to say about them. But I, like I said earlier, always try to start concise, know what I want to say about my project quickly and clearly, get that done, and then add in a little bit more information if I have the room to and it makes sense to. Now, some people start writing their abstracts really early on in their writing process for their project, and then they'll ask me, well, how do I write this abstract that's supposed to give all the important information from the study, including results, if I don't yet have the results for the project or I don't yet know what the outcome is? Um, because you haven't gotten to that stage yet, but you're still writing the abstract early. So if that's the case for you, the thing that I would recommend is that you just state your hypothesis or what you anticipate you're going to find and why, rather than the findings or results statement in the abstract. So here you're saying, I would expect to find this from the research, maybe because you did a really short pilot study and that's what you found from that. Or maybe because, I don't know, whatever the reason is, you think this is what you're going to find and why. But of course, you have to remain open to the fact that your hypothesis could change as a result of actually doing the work. Um, and, hypothesis, that's more of a science fields kind of term. You have to translate that and think about what does that mean for a more creative project or a theoretical project or something like that. And keep in mind that you can and should revise your abstract after you get further along in the project, because if you're writing it early on, a lot could change. So you got to go back to that, return to it, and see what you need to update. Maybe it means replacing the hypothesis that you initially put in rather than results, and replacing them with what the results are of the study once it's done. And a quick note about the tone and style for your abstracts. I think you already know from what I've said over and over again in this workshop that you should be as concise as possible in your abstract, because if you can state what your project is about very simply and clearly and briefly, then your audience knows you know what you're talking about. Okay? It's just a good exercise in making sure you know what you want to say about your project, and it makes very clear sense in your own head, and you can convey that out in your language and in the abstract writing. Um, Another tip that I have about tone and style is to write for that broad audience, because there are going to be some people looking at your abstracts who are coming from disciplines other than yours. So they may not know all of the terms and language that you're using. Perhaps you need to include a definition of a really important key term as part of your abstract. That's a possibility. But either way, keep your audience in mind as you write it. How are you going to make it clear to everyone who could be reading that abstract and showing some interest in it and wanting to know more? And I think my final piece of advice here for you in terms of abstract writing is make sure you're keeping your purpose in mind. Remember that an effective abstract will quickly and clearly explain to your readers what they can expect from your project if they keep on exploring it and finding out more about it. So it needs to be accurate, informative, and inviting. Bring people into it, but don't deceive them. Let them know what they are going to see if they keep on um, digging deeper into what you've created. All right, now we're nearing the end of this workshop on abstract writing. And so, what better way to conclude it than to just take some time to actually work on the abstracts that maybe you've already started drafting, maybe you haven't, for your project, um, and see if you can apply a little bit of what we covered in this workshop as you work on your abstract. So, what were your takeaways from this workshop? What stood out to you as useful information that you want to make sure you incorporate into your work as you develop your abstract? Don't delay, don't put it off, because if you wait and try to do it later, you'll probably forget some of what we covered. So my advice is just to go ahead and get a little bit done on it now, or at least if you don't do some writing on your abstract, take some notes about what you want to remember to do when you work on it later, when you have a little bit more time. So this is where you would just turn the video off and get some work done on that. But before you do, I have one last thing to tell you about, and that is the Writing Center. So at the Academic Resource Center, we have the Writing Center. And if you've never used the Writing Center before, I'll tell you it's a great place where you can come and talk to another writer about your writing. Just set that time aside, and it's not going to do you any harm, even if you already feel like you're a good and strong writer. Some of the best writers know that it's really helpful to their writing process when they talk about their writing with others. So that's what we're here for. We've got graduate and undergraduate tutors on staff. And this currently, all of our sessions are being held online. So you can make an appointment to talk to one of our tutors about your abstracts or any other part of the writing that you're doing. At any stage where you're at, maybe you need some help getting started on it, or maybe you want them to look at a near complete draft, and anywhere in between. Make an appointment, and here's how you do that. Sign into MyLMU, click on the Academics tab, and then click the link that says Writing and Course Tutoring, and that'll bring you to our online tutoring schedule, where you'll see the tutor's availability and click on the time slot that you want and fill in the information and meet with your tutor online when it's time for your appointment. So I really hope you'll take advantage of this resource that's available to you. It definitely can't hurt, and it might be really helpful. So we hope to see you in the Writing Center, and thanks for tuning in to this workshop that we have for you on writing abstracts.